The haircut. Those dog tags. That tattoo. Guile is a character almost as emblematic in the fighting game genre as Ryu himself, and he's not even on any box covers. Early Street Fighter development notes indicate that Guile was designed to be a character American players would want to play. In fact, dozens of design choices were made roster-wide specifically to accommodate arcade-goers in the West. None, however, stood out more than the patriotically emblazoned American Air Force major, sometimes non-canonically named William F. Guile. Guile's physical appearance is actually heavily inspired by the popular manga series JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. A producer in charge of character design for Capcom has stated that his overall appearance was inspired by Jean-Pierre Polnareff. Even his name is actually derived from the character's wife's killer in the series, Jay Guile. Although designed primarily to appeal to American audiences, the visage of the stoic US military officer would also naturally be familiar to the Japanese, due to the prevalence of US Armed Forces bases throughout the country. In the creator's endeavor to represent many different slices of combat culture, both domestic and international, what better caricature to represent the States than the rigid muscle mound and the baggy BDUs that is Guile? And frankly, we're all better off for it. After all, they could just as easily have gone with the equally American imagery of an oafish, drunken biker. Guile's actual impact on the events of the Street Fighter universe are, honestly, somewhat minimal. But despite that, he consistently ranks among the most recognizable men in video games, behind his Street Fighter contemporaries Ryu and Ken. Throughout the events of the Street Fighter timeline, Guile is frequently partnered with MI6 operative Cammy White and Interpol agent Chun-Li to intervene in the plans of the crime syndicate known as Shadow Lu. His recurring motivation is the defeat of Shadow Lu leader and malevolent dictator type M. Bison as revenge for the death of his US Air Force colleague and mentor Charlie Nash during the events of Street Fighter Alpha 3. In turn, the dictator masterminded the events of the Second World Warrior Tournament for the specific purpose of luring these government servants into his trap. Always a glutton for punching and kicking, Guile of course falls right in, abandoning his wife and daughter in the process. He alludes to this in his infamous and ultimately ironic win quote from Street Fighter II, where he tells his opponents to go home and be a family man. He eventually encounters Bison, and just before extracting his revenge, he's stopped by his wife and daughter, who convince him to spare Bison and return to society without becoming the very murderer he so fiercely pursued. But just like that, by the time Street Fighter IV comes around, Detective Guile is back on the case, as the US government assigns him to investigate SIN, a suspected sister agency to the original Shadow Lu. During the course of the game, he scrapes what little information there is to be had on former commanding officer Charlie, who Guile now suspects is still alive. Team International intrigue blows up another bad guy base, and Guile's headed directly to Street Fighter V. Here, instead of finding Charlie, Charlie finds him. He's confronted by the patched-together remains of his old friend, and realizing he's no longer the man he once knew, but comforted by the fact that he's still alive, he's finally able to give him back his dog tags, which Guile had been carrying this whole time, and they go their separate ways. We'll have to wait until the events of Street Fighter VI to find out the next chapter in the canon saga of Guile, but over the years, we've also gotten our fair share of Guiles across some other mediums. Street Fighter the movie was released in 1994, and true to Hollywood's uniquely American sensibilities, we got Mr. Jean-Claude Camille Francois Van Varenberg in the leading role. You may remember this film for its exceptional badness, and a depiction of Blanca that reminds me of Lou Ferrigno as the Hulk. Nevertheless, the film also inspired an accompanying game. Street Fighter, the movie The Game, resides in a unique place in history whereby a game inspired a film, which then re-inspired a game. Interestingly, the character Blade's ending seems to indicate that he's actually Gunlock, a returning character from Saturday Night Slam Masters, a wrestling game also created by Capcom, and, in this continuity, Guile's brother. Meaning that, theoretically, one of these guys is Jean-Claude's brother. So, we've talked about what Guile does around the Street Fighter world, but let's talk about what Guile does in the Street Fighter game. Guile has a famously shallow move list. Even in a game with a limited selection of special moves, Guile is especially lean as far as the cast goes, having only 2 special moves in his first appearance in Street Fighter II. We'll come back to these later, but for now, let's talk about how Guile performs his attacks. Guile's special moves are done by inputting what's called a charge motion, meaning you first hold backwards on the joystick to charge, and then use a forward command plus an attack button to unleash the move. This specific input allows for a certain type of gameplay that has come to define Guile. Because holding back is the input used to block, and holding back is also done to charge all of Guile's special moves, he's in a unique scenario where he's at his most dangerous when being defensive. This hyper-defensive type of gameplay, where you're sitting still, waiting for your opponent to perform an action while you only react, even began to go by its own name, turtling.
Guile turtling.
Guile turtling involves holding the joystick diagonally in preparation of using one of two special moves while waiting for your opponent's attack.
Guile's first special move is the Sonic Boom. Unlike some other projectiles in the game, there's almost no recovery time after a Sonic Boom, meaning that once he's put one on the screen, he's almost immediately free to act again. This creates a few scenarios, all of which fighting game players are intimately familiar with. Block the move, perform a move of your own, or evade. Let's say an opponent decides to block. In that scenario, Guile's quick recovery after the Sonic Boom means he will already be moving again by the time the block is finished. Add to that the fact that the Sonic Boom comes in 3 flavors: fast, medium, and slow. When throwing the medium or slow Sonic Boom, Guile can then close the distance between himself and his opponent and be ready to go back on the offensive. If an opponent responds with a projectile of their own, and it features the same number of hits as Sonic Boom, like Hadoken or Kikoken, and doesn't go above or below it, the projectiles will cancel one another and the two players are right back to where they started, having neither gained nor lost any advantage. That leaves the opponent with the option to evade, and that's where Guile's second special move comes into play. In addition to his Sonic Boom, performed by charging back and attacking forward, he also has Somersault Kick, aka Flash Kick, performed by charging down and attacking up. The trajectory of this move makes it perfect for attacking any opponent approaching from the air, meaning that if the opponent chooses to evade by jumping, they're wide open to being shot out of the sky by a well-timed Flash Kick. It probably can't be overstated how important Guile and the other charge-based characters on the Street Fighter II roster are to the genre of fighting games. A good character select screen should feel like a well-stocked diner menu with plenty of options for everyone, and each offering something completely different. This promotes variety and also requires the players to do their homework not only on the game mechanics at large, but also with regard to the individual capabilities of the cast. Like many characters from the original Street Fighter series, Guile's iconic moveset has also gone on to inspire dozens of characters in future fighting games, some more similar to Guile than others. King of Fighters Leona Hydern and Ash Crimson, Third Strike's Remy, Fatal Fury's Kane Heinlein, and many, many more. His limited but exceptionally useful moveset means Guile is both imminently approachable to learn and deadly effective, even at the highest levels. Speaking of the highest levels, let's talk about who chooses to use Guile and why. Florida native NuckleDu piloted Guile all the way to a Capcom Cup win in 2016, appearing as easily the most dominant player in the first season of Street Fighter V. More recently, players like Kaba and Dominion have inspired players all over the world to pick up the flat-top fighter pilot. In recent years, you will have seen the beast himself, Daigo Umehara, using Guile with mixed success at the absolute highest level of Street Fighter, although seemingly with some reluctance. Contrary to what his limited moveset might suggest, players like Daigo have theorized that there's much more to Guile than meets the eye and seek to continually morph the meta of playing this alleged one-trick military man. In an interview with CYG, Daigo was quoted, "Guile has gotten weaker, so if I stick to playing him the way people know, I won't get anywhere. It's not that I'm specifically focusing on an aggressive playstyle, likely I've become more aggressive as a result of trying to incorporate newness." FGC Translated provides this from one of Daigo's streams. "I need to start a revolution for Guile as a character, because the best that you can do with his defensive style is what I did in Topanga Championship." In closing, the type of person who might want to consider Guile on character select is someone who likes to play an absolute brick wall. If you enjoy being both the unstoppable force and the immovable object, Guile might be for you. This hair-gelled hero has been an absolute staple in Capcom's premier fighting titles, and for good reason. His impact on the genre is seen and heard everywhere, and for this reason, I suspect we will continue to see him for years to come. That'll do it for this episode of Character Select, but check back soon to see who we pick next. Comment down below if you want to see us take the deep dive on one of your favorite characters, and until then, I don't know, just pick a top tier.